now.
Great. So today, go ahead and we'll hit the next slide, Amelia. Kind of going to do a brief little one more. Awesome. We're just going to kind of do a little summary of everything we went over yesterday to kind of just give a recap. And then if you have any questions before we move into today, that'd be a great time to ask. The three main takeaways from yesterday are life's challenges fall into three categories. We talked about how there's personal challenges, meaning thoughts, feelings, and actions that are impacting your quality of life and aging in place. You have medical challenges. Those are any health issues or health management barriers that are impacting quality of life and aging in place. And then you have the environmental challenges. That's any issue affecting the safety, the accessibility, and the function of your environment that are having impacts on your quality of life and aging in place. Next slide. The other takeaway on the next slide is living in a world of constant change and challenges requires us to adapt in order to preserve quality of life and aging in place. And we talked about the three ways of adapting as a whole person. Next slide. And that is, in order to overcome those personal, medical, and environmental challenges, we want you to mentally adapt, meaning having new thoughts and new perspectives that align with your values. You want to be emotionally adapting, having new feelings, telling a new story about your situation that aligns with your values. And then physically adapting, doing things in a new way, having purposeful actions that align with your values. That last one, physically adapting, that's usually what most people jump into when they think of adapting. But what we were introducing yesterday, and hopefully we're able to kind of really zone in on for you, is that you want your whole person to be adapting. You want to mentally be adapting, emotionally adapting, and physically adapting. So those are the three takeaways from yesterday. Go ahead to the next slide. And so today we're going to focus on values, the role values play in adapting, and then making value-guided decisions when you're facing challenges and changes associated with aging in place or caregiving for someone who's aging in place, as well as strategies for mentally adapting. We're going to address that first component, mentally adapting. Okay, next slide. So when you're faced with change, it's important to focus on what you can control. That is your choices and how we respond. We get very reactionary and we try to think that we're supposed to take on the entire problem as a whole. And we're not able to solve every big problem that comes our way, but we certainly can control how we respond to that problem and the value-based decisions we make around the impacts of those problems and challenges that we face. So it's really important to start with identifying those values. So we did have that worksheet that y'all hopefully got to peek at, to look at the different values and kind of identify which ones jumped out to you, which ones you identified it with as being your core value. And then today we're going to learn to prioritize them and put a plan in place to support them. You want you to kind of think of values as like your compass. You're going to use it as a guide to make the choices and to decide what actions to put in place. Because when you do that and you're facing significant challenges and you let your values be your guide, that's a way to ensure quality of life can be preserved and that your quality of life doesn't have to be at the expense. Living life and dealing with that problem or situation doesn't have to be at the expense of your quality of life. Think of values as those fundamental principles that guide your thoughts, guide your emotions, and then guide your actions that support those thoughts and emotions. Values essentially shape those perceptions, and that's that first step in mentally adapting, having new thoughts. We're wanting you to take on new perceptions. The next slide. Our values serve as a compass. They guide our choices and our actions. They ensure that even when we're facing significant challenges, our lives can remain meaningful and purposeful. And then the next slide. This is really an important statement that I think kind of is the purpose of everything that we're doing, and what Michelle and I are really passionate about is we want people to realize that you don't have to passively be molded by our external circumstances or situations we find ourselves in, but instead we can actually consciously participate and align our thoughts, feelings, and actions to support our core values so that you can be creating a fulfilling life and not just have to be responding to situations around us, but actively participating in creating that life that you want. The next slide. So mentally adapting means looking at things from a new perspective. And that's that first thing we're going to focus on today around establishing your plan. It's all about mentally adapting in this new perspective. So I kind of want to start with a personal story about perspectives, about my grandson. So my grandson, 6 years of age, his really most beloved dog, Macy, was hit by a car. He had his puppy ever since he was 2. So he had Macy for 4 years. And I expected when this event happened, rushing over to my daughter's house, I was totally prepared for having this conversation with my grandson about how, loved ones come into our lives sometimes for a very long period of time, and sometimes loved ones come into our life for a very short amount of time. I was expecting to go over there and really comfort and support him in his grief. And as I was explaining that to him, he said, yeah, I know. Macy was in my life for such a long time, almost my whole life. And at that moment, I was like, wow. I mean, I was coming at it from my perspective, 58 years of age. He was in my life for only 4 years, which seemed very small. But to a 6-year-old who was in his life for 4 years, that's almost his entire life. And so it was just an eye-opening moment of how powerful perspectives are and how they're really a great starting point. And he came from this perspective of having him for a really long time. He was really wanting to focus on, celebrating and having a party. And he was really in a place of gratitude when I was expecting him to come from this place of grief that he didn't have a long time with him. So it's just a great little story to realize, the impacts that perspectives really have in our lives. For example, thinking about a diagnosis, we want you to realize we don't want you to focus on that diagnosis and think that you're trying to solve that problem. You're trying to solve that diagnosis. You're fixating on the diagnosis. We're wanting you to look at your circumstances and situations as you're aging, and from a place of the impact that diagnosis is having on your values, on you being able to live out your values, on being able to have those values shape your quality of life. And that's it. And from taking that perspective, it allows you to get more grounded and to use those values as an anchor, rather than getting knocked off your feet and then having to look at, this overwhelming situation, which then can lead us into catastrophizing and feeling very powerless. We're wanting you to understand the value or the importance that our values can have in anchoring us and giving us a different perspective when we're focusing on our challenges. Next slide. Thank you. So looking at things from a new perspective starts with having a plan. And that's what today's all about, that remembering it takes a plan in place to age in place. And I think that's important with anything. I think it takes a plan, to be able to have any kind of satisfaction in anything we do. Going on vacation, switching new jobs, any new situation in our life, I think really requires having a plan, which leads to the next slide where we talk about what are the benefits of having a plan. Why do we want to have a plan for aging in place? A plan helps us prioritize our values. It provides structure, focus, and direction for your thoughts to support those values. It helps us identify our limitations and abilities to support those values. It helps us identify our personal, medical, and environmental needs that have to be addressed in order to support what we value. And also a plan really preserves quality of life. We need to remember that values are what we value pretty much stays the same all our life. We may add values to it, but how we prioritize our values changes with life. For example, when I was younger, in my early teens and 20s, I really valued friendships. I continued to value friendships, but I prioritized my friendships much more, and they were really at the center of my focus when I was younger than when I was in my 30s and 40s raising a family. At that point, friendships had to take a little bit of a backseat as I had to prioritize my family, valuing my family. So it's important to remember that as we age, our values don't change, but how we prioritize them based on different circumstances and situations change. So having a plan where we go back and check in on our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and check in on what value am I prioritizing in this particular situation, is a very vital role in helping us preserve our quality of life, especially as we age and we face a tremendous amount of changes over a short amount of time at a very fast rate. And these changes affect so many areas of our lives. Next slide. So a plan is not about tackling the entire problem, but a plan is about focusing on your values and addressing the impacts these challenges have on your values. So like I was saying earlier, if you're going on vacation, without a plan, you'll lose sight of, you might start feeling overwhelmed. Situations can start to make you feel really stressed. Not having a plan really puts you at risk of a lot of unnecessary stresses and strains, and you could really lose sight of what you value. And I've been on many vacations where there was no plan, you're just winging it, and then everybody starts to be really stressed and tense, and they start getting on each other's nerves, and it's like you lose sight of the purpose of the vacation, as a whole. What was I valuing? It's like this time together, making great memories, spending time with my family. And without a plan, and you're inviting all that unnecessary stress, that you could lose sight of that value. So it is necessary to have a plan in place, for anything that matters to you. So that leads us to now, what are the key components to a plan? I'm going to let Michelle step in, kind of go over those parts.
Yeah, I wanted to ask real quick before we get started on that. Does anybody have any questions about how we're tying in values, or any thoughts about if you looked at the worksheet last night, or any questions really just in going through those and having difficulty prioritizing even values? Any questions or any thoughts?
Elizabeth.
I know Elizabeth said, I love the value sheet.
Awesome.
Good. We talk a lot about intentionally living, and intentionally living is directly related to your quality of life and being able to stay in touch with what we value. I mentioned yesterday, if I'm busy and get wrapped up in work and my giant to-do list, then I do lose sight of my values and what's important. And I realize that, I get to the weekend and I just feel like, man, that was a tough week, and that didn't represent, and I didn't feel great during that week. And when I go back and look at what's important to me, I realize, gosh, I didn't check hardly any of those boxes this week. I was just reacting to everything that was thrown my way. And, and conversely, when I get to the end of my week and all of a sudden I was like, that was so fun. I got to be with friends. I took time Tuesday to go, watch my kids' game or whatever. And so it does help to have, those values in the forefront, just in general in daily life, but especially when you're aging and we are faced with so many different challenges, and many of them are unexpected. They're not expected changes that we're planning for. That those values help to anchor us with how to make forward and go forward with decisions. And a lot of times decisions impact not only us, but our adult children that are helping to support us as we age. And so Let's, like we talked before, values, we are mental, physical, and emotional beings. And so we're going to focus on the mental piece today, on that first step and how to adapt. And so the plan is built on 4 key components, and it's PLAN. And so priorities is the first one. We're identifying and prioritizing your core values. So the value sheet helped to identify your core values. And then the next component is limitations. And you're identifying the barriers or challenges to supporting your core values. What's getting in the way right now of you living the life that you want to be living? What's getting in the way of those values? And abilities. Identify your abilities that are supporting your core values. What things can you bring to the table, or can other people bring to the table to support your core values? And then lastly, the N is your needs. And we've been talking about your personal, medical, and environmental needs. What do we need to do to support your core values that's going to address your personal, medical, and environmental needs? So we're going to break that down, and then at the end, we'll do a case study and answer some more questions. So next slide is the P. So the first component is a plan. Let's identify and prioritize your core values. Like, what truly matters to you in your daily life? What is it? Your health, your relationships, your family, community, faith. Those categories are very broad. And sometimes you may have, we said 10 or 15 on that list, and then coming up with 5. That if you can maintain sight of those top at least 5, then it helps to move forward with addressing and making value guided decisions that, like Melissa said, we're not tackling the entire problem, and that feels very overwhelming. We're tackling the things that are getting in the way of you maintaining and supporting your core values, living that life you want. And so it's a very focused approach on helping you systematically find solutions to some of the needs that you have. And this is the first step. And so a lot of times when we meet with people, they're just overwhelmed. They rate their quality of life poorly, and they don't know where to start. And so we start with your core values and prioritizing your core values and finding out what really matters to you. Because once we have that as your anchor, then we can go forward with putting solutions or things in place. And the next component is limitations. These are any personal, medical, and environmental barriers or challenges to supporting those core values. Okay, and so we are looking at assessing what is hindering you from being able to live the life that you want, being able to do the things that are important to you on a daily basis. What are those challenges? And so there's 3 different categories. So the next slide. Under personal challenges, we have informational. These gaps in knowledge, education, or technology skills. It could be access to technology. Emotional, or these are feelings. This is our feelings that are getting in the way, or guilt or grief that can help you take and helping your ability to take action and do things. Your personal beliefs, social issues related to isolation, social norms, also the opinions of others. Is it a financial challenge, monetary resources, availability? Is it a cultural challenge? Factors related to diversity, ethnicity, race, and age. And so these are all personal challenges that can limit our ability to be living the life that we want, to be supporting our core values as we go through the day. Now let's move to the next slide. Those were the personal, and this are the medical. These are any medical health related challenges or issues that can be impacting our ability to support and protect our core values and what's important. We have cognitive factors. So are there memory issues, processing information? Do you have biomechanical factors? That's your strength, your endurance, your range of motion, physically what's happening in your body. And then we talked yesterday a lot about health management strategies and skills. understanding your diagnosis, the signs and symptoms associated with the diagnosis, the potential trajectory of the diagnosis. What is this going to look like in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years? Those are all medical challenges that can impact, my ability to support my core values if we're having a limitation in this area. And the next slide would be the environmental challenges. So we've done the personal challenges. This is a list of medical, and then now we're on the environmental. We talked yesterday a lot about safety, accessibility, and function. And so these are the physical aspects of your home and your community that can be impacting your ability to support your core values. And it's physical, it's home and community setting.
And the reason, just to add to what Michelle was saying, the reason we break it down into these 3 categories and then break these categories down into smaller pieces as well is to help you realize that, exactly what's being impacted. A lot of times people jump into action. I mean, I jumped into action, for example, with my grandson, thinking I needed to go in there and deal with some, personal challenge. Like he was emotionally going to be stricken with grief. And it was like, I was trying to solve something that didn't need to be fixed. I didn't need to solve that. He was really in a good place. He was thinking he had him for his whole life, and he was grateful, and he wanted to do a party and a celebration. And it's like, a lot of times, we may take on trying to fix all these things or address all these things, but when we really tease it back into these categories, we can really isolate and look and realize not every area of your life is impacted by this diagnosis or by this circumstance or situation. Like, for example, my daughter going off to college right now, I mean, she was originally super overwhelmed. But then when I started, teasing it back for her and putting things into categories, she realized a lot of these, this big change in her life wasn't really impacting the things she valued as much as she thought. For instance, family and family time. It's like, you still can spend family time. We can still talk. We can do Zoom. We can still do all these things to still spend time together. But then when we did that, she was able to realize it was something she could, manage to preserve her quality of life. So just kind of why we're breaking it up this way.
Right. Then the third component of a plan is the A, and that is the abilities. So we've categorized the limitations so that we're able to identify, how these are impacting us, and the abilities. We also have many things that are strengths that get lost along the way as we age, because we're just so focused on everything that's not working and not, these new diagnoses, and we are very focused on the limitations. And it is extremely important to remember we have a lot of abilities, and we can problem solve. And that's one of the reasons why our nonprofit is called Solace and Sage, because you are the person that is in charge of your plan, and you are the one that can only identify what's important to you and what your values are. And you have a community many times that you have around you, and a lot of friends and people that can support you. And there's abilities within ourselves, within our family, within our community, our church group. And so at times when you're needing to make some adjustments, it's important to look around and identify all those abilities as well. And then the next component is the N, which is the need. And so we are looking at your personal and medical and environmental needs that are going to address those limitations, because those limitations are what are in the way of us supporting our core values. Those are the barriers. And so what needs do we have in the personal, medical, and environmental areas that can be addressed to support our being able to live our life and engage and participate and experience the things that really still matter most to us? They just need to look a little differently. All right, so any questions before we move on to a case study? Everybody good? Okay, so we're going to look at a case study of an individual And then after that, we're also going to talk about what this looks like as a caregiver and how to work with a caregiver and their personal plan as well. So let's look at Bill. Bill is a 72-year-old diagnosed recently with Parkinson's. Quality of life rating was a 4 out of 10, 10 being the high score. I'm asking about specific areas, just a lot of general feelings of dissatisfaction, depression, not recognizing the life that he was living right now compared to what he was living even 6-9 months ago. Couldn't really identify what was different, but just a general feeling of dissatisfaction and being lost along the way, and filling days with doctor's appointments and trying to strategize, and just kind of giving up. And so we're going to take you through what we took Bill through to help him identify, what needed to happen for him. So in doing the core values sheet, Bill circled a lot of things and then realized from that there was 4 that were the top things that provided value, provided meaning, joy, happiness to him. And the first one was spending, and these weren't actually in like numerical order, these are just the top 4. First one was being able to spend time with family. And at his home, at his daughter's home in town, being able to relax, and he had a lot of personal activities that he did to relax. Loved being outside in nature and accessing community in nature, his own backyard in nature, and that was one of his ways to relax. And then also faith was a really important. He was very involved in his church family. And so those were his priorities that were his core values. And so we're going to take those 4 values, and then now we're going to move forward to make sure that we put a plan in place so that he can support those values. I'm not focused on putting a plan in place to deal with Parkinson's or understand Parkinson's or deal with that diagnosis. I'm taking his core values, and we're going to focus on a plan for those, because I know if we address those and we keep those 4 things happening, those are the most important things happening right now, that at the end of the week, he's going to feel like he had a pretty good week and his quality of life is going to improve, because those are the things that matter to him. Okay, so limitations. Limitations. Personal challenges. When we looked at his different limitations and all those different categories that we talked about before, the technology, and with the personal category and the personal limitations and challenges, his main challenge was emotional. He had not really wrapped his head around that diagnosis and had a fear of sharing that diagnosis with his family or friends. And so that emotional challenge was keeping him from, fully being present with his family, because he was avoiding talking to them about it. He was avoiding going to church. And so he had a fear that he recognized about sharing that diagnosis. Medical challenge, we went through the list of what's happening with you medically. That's impacting his values. And he said, I'm not able to spend time with my family, and I'm missing church in the mornings because I'm on a new medication and it's making me very dizzy and drowsy. And actually, I don't even feel comfortable going out in my backyard. I'm afraid I'm going to fall. And so in taking the focus on family, relaxation, nature, and faith, he said what's impacting that and what's medically happening is I'm on a new medication and it's making me dizzy and drowsy. And then also because of this diagnosis, I've noticed that I've got decreased mobility and endurance. And so I am not accessing church. I'm not going outside. I'm having a hard time relaxing. And there was sort of the medical challenges that he was experiencing. Environmental challenges. He had a game room on the second floor, and everyone came to visit their house, and the grandkids, and they all stayed upstairs and watched movies. And that was their family time together, and that was very important to him. And mobility became an issue, and he was not able to really walk upstairs comfortably or safely. And so he was worried about, my family time is going to be impacted, and is impacted because I'm not inviting them over anymore to host. Well, then going to his daughter's home, she had 4 steps getting into the house. And so that was an issue. He loved being in the backyard and gardening and had this amazing sanctuary, but it was very uneven. It was, gravel and rocks. It was a mix of steps and gravel and rocks. And he never thought about it before, but now that his mobility had become impacted, he didn't feel safe going out there. And he had dizziness because of that medication. He has also not been going to church because the worship center was very far away from the bathroom, and his endurance. By the time he walked all the way in from the parking lot and got to the church service, and then he had to go to the bathroom, and being in large crowds. And so all of those things had resulted in him spending less time with his family, not less time with his church family and his biological family, not spending time out in nature, and not sleeping. And so when you look at, these are the 4 things that he really valued, and he knew that would bring him joy and that impacted his quality of life. If we focus just on how these challenges were impacting those things, then we were able to come up with, continue forward with our plan. And so let's look at the abilities. The next slide. So again, focusing on what abilities do you have, whether it's you, your family, your church family, that can come to the table and support you in your core values. Socially, great abilities. He has a very supportive family. He had a church network. Informational, Bill had the technical skills to interact online, whether it was with his medical providers, his church, his family. And so he had many abilities there. And financially, he has medical coverage. Those are personal abilities. Medical abilities, cognitively, he was intact and was a great problem solver and participant in managing, and wanting to manage and navigate his life. Environmental abilities, he has a gym membership. He lived in a house and he had access to a gym membership.
I just want to add with Bill, when we started to focus on the abilities, the third part of his plan, you could totally see a new light, on his face. It was like all of a sudden, we were empowering him. We were creating some balance, because when we just focus on a problem, or we just focus on our limitations, that leads us to feeling incredibly overwhelmed. And, you're not really getting a structure, and you don't even know how to begin to tackle. But as we were balancing that out with having him sit and focus on his abilities, it also made him realize that this diagnosis hasn't really impacted every area of his life, and that we were really focusing and narrowing it down to what were the impacts, what were the limitations, and then we're balancing them out with, well, what abilities do you have to address these limitations so that he can continue to preserve his quality of life and focus on those values. And so it's just really helpful having this framework, and we saw it, happen right in front of us. It is powerful.
Amelia, did you see that, Megan?
I did see that.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and unlock it for now, Megan. If you could just go ahead and let me know in the chat when you've been able to get back in. That's it. You can go ahead.
All righty. Okay, so let's flip to the next one, the needs. Okay, so we're looking at the needs. These are what personal, medical, and environmental needs to address the limitations or the challenges that are supporting your core values. And so what are the challenges impacting my time with family, relaxation, nature, and faith? And then what do I need to do? What are the things that I need to put in place, need to address to support those limitations so that they're less of a barrier to supporting my values. So first one example, Bill had that personal challenge, that fear of sharing a diagnosis with the family or friends. And so that is absolutely an individual decision, and everyone has many factors that contribute to whether or not they share a diagnosis. We talk a lot about having those circle of friends and that circle of impact. And if you're not familiar with that tool, that's a great tool to use when you're trying to prioritize who you would share information with. But that would be something that we would recommend that he explore behind that fear, the reasons why he has not shared that, why he hasn't shared that diagnosis. And there can be many factors involved in that fear, but that would be a way to mitigate and address that personal challenge of fear. And when we talk about the second and third parts of helping somebody adapt, emotions is a large part of that second step, because this is the mentally adapting step, and then the second is emotional, and third being the physical. So continuing with the needs, we just talked about the personal need. The second need is a medical need to address those medical challenges. So what was the medical challenge that Bill identified? Is he had medication causing drowsiness and dizziness? And so that recommendation would be talk to your physician about those medication options. A lot of times we just get the medication and the doctor says, is this it? And then, this is what they recommend. And we have to be advocates and come back to our doctor and say, this one didn't really work for me. Is there another option? Is there another time of day? Is there something else I can take, to supplement or to support this?
We need to head out.
What time?
Now.
All right.
Got 30 minutes.
Sorry,
So
Megan,
just, yeah,
you
as quick
were
as you can.
unmuted for a second. There you go. You're muted, Megan. Go ahead, Melissa. Or Michelle, sorry.
That's okay. Anyway, so with that medical challenge, talk to your doctor. Second one was decreased mobility and endurance. That would be getting on therapy, physical or occupational therapy. Or he had one of his abilities was he had gym memberships. So, get a trainer at the gym to supplement, get some exercises from a PT and get a home exercise program, and then use that ability that he had with the gym membership to support and supplement, for some guided exercise.
And just to add in, there's other medical challenges obviously associated with Parkinson's, but he was focusing specifically on the ones that were impacting his time with his family, his time in nature, his ability to go to church, and his means of relaxation. And so that's the significance of breaking it down, that he's not trying to tackle every sign and symptom of Parkinson, just the ones that were impacting his values and his quality of life.
Right. I went to a Parkinson's workshop not too long ago, and someone made the comment that they were newly diagnosed and they were just completely overwhelmed with and feeling actually guilty that they weren't doing enough, because they had been given information about nutrition and the importance of sleep and different types of exercises and endurance exercises with the strength training. And so it's, she just said, I just feel like I need to quit my job and just completely focus all day on all of these things that are going to impact me and improve my quality of life. And, and we talked about just focusing again on what's important right now and focusing on, how that has impacted you, because you can't do it all. And you don't need to. You need to focus on what's important to you. Some things are not going to be important to you. That's why it starts with your values. And there's a lot of people, I am an expert in certain things, but I'm not an expert in what is important to you and what you value and what's going to make your day look better. And so if you come to me and say, hey, I just need a plan, I'm going to come back to you and say, well, let's help you figure out what your plan is. And so that's the whole point of us teaching you this, is so that you can take these skills, and regardless of what comes your way, because many things are going to change as you age, that you have a framework to continue to problem solve and make a plan and start. It starts with you and being able to understand. And so we try to simplify this as much as possible so that you can, continue to use this framework on your own when something comes up. Environmental challenges. There was a couple here. And again, helping to support. These are the things that he came up with. There was many environmental challenges that were going to impact him as his physical body declined. But at this point, these were the things that were impacting what he valued and what he wanted to target so that he could improve his quality of life score. And the first one was that poor access to his family game room on the second floor, and he was not having family over. And so we just recommended move your guest room upstairs and move your game room downstairs, flip-flop. And so, everybody could be downstairs. It was actually the guest room was downstairs and kind of off the kitchen. And so he wasn't ready to really talk to anybody about his diagnosis, but it was just a very logical progression to have everybody downstairs and near the kitchen, and kind of one of those things they thought, you know what, we never even thought about doing it that way. We originally, I think, originally they had said they just wanted to make it easier for their guests, and they put that there. But she said, when we went to the model home, the actual game room was that. It was actually right off the kitchen, and we kind of turned that room into the guest bedroom, but they had never thought about it. And again, that was that perspective taking, being able to just shift your thinking and realize, oh, you know what, that actually makes more sense. And we were just focused on, I can't have my family anymore over because I can't get upstairs, and my grandkids are going to wonder why I'm not going upstairs. And so just a different set of eyes, taking a different perspective that was an easy fix and a very natural fix. 4 steps into the daughter's home. And again, he was not ready to explore the diagnosis with his family, but he knew that his daughter's garage was a very simple, low step to get into the home. And so we problem solved that he could use a rubber threshold ramp and be easily able with a walker or wheelchair to get into his daughter's home. And spent some time also talking about that your daughter has been very supportive throughout any medical issue, and you are a close-knit family. And so your daughter's going to be willing to add in that rubber threshold ramp to her home and is not going to have an issue, with that. And so that, helped, and that your daughter wants to spend time with you. And so again, taking a perspective that the daughter would probably even put a ramp over the 4 steps into the front of the house because she would want you to continue to come over. But when you haven't had those conversations, everything felt like it was a barrier. And so just problem solving that. And then the other one, uneven terrain in the backyard, create a smooth pathway to sit in the backyard, utilize a wheelchair, or a heavier 4-wheeled walker. The bathroom being too far away at the church. He, had the technology abilities. That was one of, that we listed in the abilities that he could learn how to participate in online worship services on days when he wasn't feeling good, or if he needed to. And then also he could use a wheelchair at church. And so it was, looking at all of those abilities and how they factor into addressing those limitations. In creating and addressing his environmental challenges. I think that's the last one there. So let's talk a little bit about a caregiver, or if you have somebody that is supporting, or maybe you're even supporting your parents. When, caregiver burnout is a very frequently used conversation, frequent topic, and the things that we focus on. And it's important to realize that everybody has to have a plan. Your aging parent will have a plan. And if I'm a caregiver, I have to have my own plan, because we may all have the same values. We may all be prioritizing my mom's health and her safety and her socialization. But I also have limitations and abilities and needs, just like my mom has limitations, abilities, and needs. And so as a caregiver, we can get very focused on just working through our mom's plan or our parents' plan, and sometimes at the expense of what our limitations are, and then also not recognizing even what abilities we have at the table and can bring to the table. And so it is important when we work with families that everybody sits and makes their own plan that looks at their limitations and abilities. And so if I am needed to do a certain thing to support my mom's needs, then it needs to be in my ability category. I can't put myself, and I'm limited. I can't, I have carpool and I have kids and I have sports. I can't be the person that's going to, come by at night and make sure that she gets to bed. But maybe I'm that person that comes by during the day and can check on her at lunch. And so I think what happens is, as a caregiver or a person, a loved one involved in a situation, we are reacting to the list of needs and not addressing and not recognizing what our limitations and abilities are as well.
Right. And another example, Michelle, was like when, the priorities are going to be the same in terms of, you're all on the same page with the same priority, making sure mom's needs are met. But like Michelle said, her limitations and abilities and her needs are going to be different than her mom's limitations, abilities, and needs. And an example was, the priority was making sure she gets to her doctor's appointment. And, a lot of caregivers find it really difficult to, manipulate and rearrange their schedules to do that. And so when you realize my limitation is I can't go to a doctor's appointment on any given day for my mom, I need to schedule all appointments to be on Wednesdays because I have the ability to go take my mom to that doctor's appointment on Wednesday. And so, without a plan, like we said, it can lead to all these unnecessary stresses and strains. And also, that plan piece is how we mentally adapt. We mentally adapt to the plan, and then we emotionally adapt, and then we physically adapt. There's 2 more steps to adapting. But the reason we mentally, emotionally, and physically adapt is because if we're not doing all 3, well, it's not sustainable. You'll end up either with burnout or you end up realizing, gee, I thought that was a great idea, but I'm not mentally on board or emotionally on board, and you end up just not carrying it out. You don't end up carrying out those actions. And so it's really important that, you're mentally, emotionally, and physically adapting so that you can sustain what it is you're wanting, sustain those values and sustain that plan. That plan is just the mental piece. Now we've got to get you to emotionally adapt, and then we put physically adapt by finding these actions that support your plan. So it's a 3-part process because, like we were explaining, you're a mental, emotional, and physical beings. And so it is important that the caregiver has a plan as well as the loved one you're providing care for, so that this plan can be sustainable.
Right. Any questions? I'm looking at the time. We have 5 minutes.
Any questions?